I am Dr. Greg, and we will be talking about dietary supplements and metabolomics. So I am Dr. Greg Naccarelli. I am a naturopathic doctor and a PhD in genetics and genomics. I'm a precision health consultant and clinical success manager at Theriome. And ultimately, my goal is to combine the natural medicine world with omics technology with the goal of improving precision and personalization of medicine, which I feel like is sorely lacking in the conventional medicine field. So today we will be talking about dietary supplements. We'll be talking about concerns about that, regulation, quality, some precautions about that, drug supplement interactions, resources, recommending dietary supplements, and then we'll be looking at dietary supplements and metabolic pathways in terms of common metabolic pathways and then how dietary supplements can assist these metabolic pathways. So how did I get interested in dietary supplements? First off, I want everyone to think about this. What was the first dietary supplement you ever took? I want you to think about that moment. I want you to think about what your experience was. And I'll tell you, I was probably about 12 or 13. Okay, I'm going to not count Flintstones vitamins. I was probably about 12 or 13. I would get stomach aches from eating particular meals. And I came across ginger oil capsules. And I hated having stomach aches. I hated having nausea. And I remember I took a ginger oil capsule and it immediately took my nausea away. And it profoundly impacted me in terms of completely alleviating my symptoms. And I thought, well, one, how come my doctor never told me about this? How come no one ever told me about this? And what else is out there? And so I then started working at a local supplement store for a guy who was a holistic pharmacist. His name was Gary Wolf. And I was also at the time training to make my basketball team. So I started looking into sports nutrition. The second supplement I ever took was arginine and orthogonine, which can help with vasodilation, and that combination actually helps stimulate growth hormone. Because I was trying to get a little bit taller, which I did. I grew about an inch that summer and fall. I thought I was doing other things, but anyway, that was turned into a slippery slope of me looking at all supplements. And when I was working in that vitamin and mineral store, I basically touched every single supplement there, being a stock boy, and then becoming the expert and helping people with supplements. And that was kind of my beginning into this whole world. So if I have a bias when it comes to diet, lifestyle, nutrition, supplements, genetics, and everything, blah, 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 I would say supplements is just the thing. It's just because of initially my foray into this field, it was this incredible. So, but I'm curious. So I'd love to hear everyone's responses in terms of kind of how, if they have gotten to dietary supplements. What I found is some practitioners have not worked with dietary supplements at all. And that was sort of the impetus in me doing this webinar and then subsequently in us doing an onboarding for practitioners in the future to help them understand how do you use supplements in practice. Supplements are part of metabolomics. If you've done the Theriome Aristotle metabolomic test, we talk about supplements. And so there's a lot there to consider when using that in practice. And we'll cover that. What are dietary supplements? So according to FDA, dietary supplement is intended to add or supplement the diet and are different from conventional foods. These contain one or more of the following: a vitamin, a mineral, an herb, botanical, amino acid, dietary substance used by man to supplement the diet, that being enzymes, organ tissues, glandulars. The FDA does not have pre-approval authority for dietary supplements. So some people say, is it FDA approved? Even though it's almost kind of silly because most of the stuff the FDA approves winds up harming people, gets removed off the market. But regardless, it is on the burden of the FDA to prove that a dietary supplement represents significant risk of illness or injury. So one thing I like to emphasize with practitioners is it's called a dietary supplement. And the idea is that you need a baseline healthful diet. And then from there, you add a supplement to the diet, that being a dietary supplement. And the thing I tell my patients is, look, if I'm just giving you dietary supplements and we're not doing the other stuff, we're not doing diet or lifestyle, you're going to take the dietary supplement, it's not going to work, and you're going to come back to me and say, well, you don't know what you're doing because you gave me the supplement. It was supposed to lower my blood glucose and it didn't. And I'd say, well, are you still eating sweets? Are you still eating junk food? Are you still sedentary? It's like, well, yeah. Well, it's not going to counteract all that. Some supplements are very powerful, but you have to do the baseline stuff. Another thing to keep in mind, when you're looking at the most impactful interventions on the human body, especially when we're looking at vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients, when these are obtained from the diet, the impact on health states are better, where you see better outcomes compared to dietary supplements. So that's another thing to consider. So with that said, dietary supplements are great, but make sure the baseline foundations are there before jumping to dietary supplements. So some things to ask when you're working with patients. Most people are taking dietary supplements. So the question is, what supplements are you taking? What are the brands? What are the dosages? Where did you purchase them? Did you get them from a reputable distributor, or did you get it from some random person on Amazon? Some people are not aware that there's fake brands being sold or ingredients are being mislabeled in supplements. So there's baseline education that needs to be established with that as well. What has been their responses to particular supplements? Have they had past reactions with supplements, whether they were good, or did they have good reactions to supplements and they felt better from it? What is the timing of their supplementation? Are they taking it with meals? Are they taking it on an empty stomach? Do they have different dietary sensitivities and allergies? Some people, soy is found in some supplements. You have to make sure they're not getting soy or gluten. Where do they get their supplement information from? Do they hear a Dr. Gundry infomercial at 3 a.m. that's talking about selling something? Not that I have anything against Dr. Gundry, but I don't know why I just keep seeing him pop up everywhere. Or are they, do they go to the NIH, or do they get it from podcasts? Like, where are they getting their information from? I think is another important thing. What preferred supplement form? Some people don't like taking pills. Some people like liquids. And so you have to account for that information before you just start recommending a bunch of things, and people, they wind up not taking because they don't like the method of taking it. And just foundationally, does the patient or their physician even know how to read a supplement label and interpret what they're looking at? So there's just some foundational questions that need to be established when working with dietary supplements. What can impact dietary supplements? So lots of different things to consider. The uses and safety. So there's lots of different, it's a huge market, right? We have 220 billion projected, in 2022 dietary supplement sales. There's lots of different products on the markets. We have different safety and interaction concerns. So where is it being sourced? What is the extraction process, right? Lots of supplement companies use the same sourcing, but some don't. Some I actually consider higher quality because they don't. What's the stability and bioavailability of the supplements? The design. One thing to consider is how they're being regulated. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Some things to consider. They could be contaminated. So two big things that can affect dietary supplements are contamination with heavy metals and microbial byproducts. Is the dosing appropriate in the supplements? It's another issue I come across. Where is it sourced? Do the active constituents, are they actually there? And is there other things in there that shouldn't be there? What are the other ingredients in a dietary supplement? Are they helping with the absorption? Are they helping with the active ingredient to elicit the desired effect? And then again, where is it being dosed? When is it being dosed? So lots of factors to consider with dietary supplements. There is the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. So essentially, if it was in the market before October 15th, 1994, it's presumed to be safe. Afterwards, if it's being introduced into the market, a new dietary ingredient notification needs to be submitted to the FDA. And so the way that works, was it found in the food supply? If so, then it's generally recognized as safe, or a new dietary ingredient notification. If it has not, is it generally recognized as safe? And then is there proof of it being used in the conventional food supply? If not, because then we're crossing into the drug territory, right? And there's even some supplements that are rumored to be, taken off the market and considered a drug. So, there's this caveat here, which it needs to fall under that category that I mentioned previously: vitamin, mineral, enzyme, glandular, one of those things. I like to make this an emphasis between practitioner versus non-practitioner level brands. A practitioner level brand is going to be pharmaceutical grade. What is pharmaceutical grade? It's usually done by these good manufacturing practices. And so it's the actual manufacturing process itself that is certified versus just good laboratory practices. It means they're just documenting properly. So you want to go for the ones that are CGMP. They are verified to contain the claimed ingredients, right? You could ask for something called a Certificate of Analysis, COA, and the COA, which is demonstrated here, will let you know that they've tested for these things, right? That it actually contains what it mentions. They've tested for heavy metals, that there is low levels of it, and they've tested for some of these other microbial contaminants, and they're not present or below detectable levels. Make sure that the dosing is appropriate. That's another thing that irks me with some non-practitioner level brands is they'll have the ingredient in there, but it's like 1 milligram and it should be actually 1,000. And it's like, okay, I'm sorry, I know you're taking this thing, but it's at a dose so low, it's not going to be making a difference. And generally speaking, practitioner level brands have less fillers and additives compared to non-practitioner level brands. If we're looking at quality testing, so you could get supplements that are USP or NSF certified, and there are numerous resources to look at different brands and their transparency in terms of the ingredients they contain, the testing that they do for other contaminants, and so on and so forth. So consumerlabs.com, labdoor.com, subcode.co, and certifications.nutrisource.ca are amongst some of the many resources available to look at the quality of different supplements. So some precautions with supplements, be careful with excessive dosing. That could be a concern. Interactions with other supplements or medications. So that's another thing I'll talk about in a second. There's different side effects. Supplements are not benign, and especially with people that are very sensitive, they could have interactions with supplements. Some people react the opposite for every single supplement possible. It's like I take GABA and now I'm wired and I can't sleep. It's like, so sometimes that just happens, but there's other reasons for that. Is there additives and fillers in there? So some things I like to personally avoid: titanium dioxide, which it's the thing that's found in, I believe, Skittles, and I believe it's been banned, but it's found in some supplements, which it contains titanium, which is not good. Some contain gluten, food colorings, artificial flavors, lactose, phosphates. These are things I generally try to avoid. Usage around certain diseases. So if someone has cancer, it's going to change the supplements that someone should do. If someone has thyroid disease, it's going to change the timing of certain supplements, as amongst various other diseases. Pregnancy and lactation. This will also change what supplements, because when you are lactating and when you're pregnant, you are passing these ingredients and constituents to the baby. And so databases or resource I like for this is lacmed.gov, which is an open source one. And then for the natural medicines database, the pregnancy and lactation checker, to look and see the evidence, if there exists, for the safety in using certain supplements around pregnancy and lactation. So there's lots of different precautions here. I mean, I'm including some graphs here, but with soluble fiber, you have to watch for bowel obstruction. Polyunsaturated fatty acids with these anti-inflammatory supplements, one thing you have to worry about is too much blood thinning. With soy, hypersensitivity with niacin could affect the liver, possibly. Chitosan coagulation disorders, artichoke, you have to be careful. Although it can support your gallbladder, it can worsen cholelithasis. And so, there's a bunch of different drug interactions here. When we're looking at, okay, how would a herb or a supplement interact with a drug, it's going to affect either the pharmacokinetic properties or the pharmacodynamic properties. And that if it's affecting the pharmacokinetic properties, it's going to be affecting the desorption, it's going to be affecting the distribution or the metabolism. And then if it affects the pharmacodynamic properties, it's going to affect how we are eliminating the drug. It's going to affect the receptor binding. And then in general, it could affect other organs as well. Ultimately, and that's one big concern too, is if you're changing the drug concentrations. So it's another concern where, let's say you take a supplement and somebody's on a medication, that supplement inhibits the detoxification of that drug, which increases the concentration. Now that person has higher levels of the drug than desired, and that's how the adverse event occurs. So something to consider. There are lots of these that are known. So aspirin and ginkgo have an interaction, hydrocortisone and licorice, lithium, and actually psyllium, which will have a further increase in reducing cholesterol. St. John's wort is a big one. I will say if you have one takeaway from this webinar, St. John's wort will interact with a lot of different medications. It's an awesome herb for depression and antiviral, and I like it, but I'm very cautious with using it because it does have many different interactions. Garlic's another one, affect blood thinning. Green tea actually has an interaction with folic acid. It'll decrease blood folate concentrations. Affects concentrations of chloroquine for people with like rheumatoid arthritis. Kava is actually going to affect many different things. It's going to affect the liver, so it can affect concentrations of certain drugs like chlorothoxazone. And so as a general rule, like I mentioned, St. John's wort interacts with most drugs, so be careful. Honorable mentions when you look at other common drug, supplement, or herb interactions: golden seal, garlic, and Asian ginseng. There's a lot to consider there. Be cautious with excessive bleeding when pairing natural pharmaceutical anti-inflammatories. I think it's overstated, but it should not be understated as well. If, for example, if someone's on a blood thinning medication, they take omegas, if they start having petechiae or easy bruising, then okay, I got to back down the dose a little bit. If they're undergoing other really powerful pharmaceutical interventions like chemotherapy, that's definitely something to consider. Supplements, some supplements can help with the chemo, but some supplements can counteract the benefits. Again, I feel like that's overstated, but it should not be understated as well. If they are on psychotropics, be careful with neurotransmitter affecting supplements, and especially if a drug has a narrow therapeutic index like cyclosporin, warfarin, lithium, theophylline. Be careful with supplement use because you don't want to open that increase or decrease in the concentration of that medication. If you want more information about this, you have access to this slide deck and you will have access to this webinar. It will be uploaded to YouTube later, but there are many different types of supplement resources. So my favorite is the Natural Medicines database. There's a drug supplement interaction checker. There's a drug nutrient checker in there. You could also go to the NIH has the Office of Dietary Supplements. It's okay. They have some decent information on there. And then there's the U.S. Pharmacopoeia Convention. So there's some dietary supplement monograph and information in there as well. So last thoughts, stay away from blends. I do not like blends. Here's an example of a neurotropic supplement on the market, and they have this synergistic and proprietary formulation, and it's 692 milligrams. Already that's pretty low, all things considered. And they have DMAE and glutamine and bacopen and all these things and vinpocetine. I'm like, how much of each of these is in here? Because you don't know. So I am not a fan of blends. And also, if people seeing you as a practitioner, they're looking for more nuanced information. And then to get that, they are oftentimes interacting with certain ingredients in the supplement. If you give this to somebody, how do you know if they're having a bad reaction, what they're reacting to? You're setting yourself up for failure. If anything, do individual ingredients. If not, I stick to maybe 4 or 5 different ingredients, not vitamins and minerals, of course, but like herbs or individual amino acids in a supplement. This way we could kind of tease out what is eliciting the effects. Have a plan for the supplements. People say, do I just take this the rest of my life? So know which supplements you're doing, whether it's going to be transient dosing. For example, let's say they have a gut infection and you're giving them some berberine or golden seal or something that you're trying to kill off some bacteria or something. That's going to be transient. You're just going to do it for a period of time. Versus more cyclic or rhythmic supplementation. So for example, vitamin D, you're going to have people start dosing that in the fall and winter and some of the spring months. So there's a plan for that. Some people, I'll see they continue dosing vitamin D throughout the entire year, and then their vitamin D levels are like 110 nanograms per mil, and their doctor's freaking out like, whoa, your liver's going to shut down. It's like, all right, look, just pause it during the summer, get your sunlight, and then during the winter, and check your levels too. This is where the labs come in, which we'll get to in a little bit. And then some staple supplements. I consider vitamin C a staple. I just take it all the time. I'll always be taking it. So just make sure that's kind of delineated for people. But consider pulse dosing for some supplements. Let's just take breaks on occasion. So maybe 5 days on, 2 days off, or maybe 3 weeks on, 1 week off, especially for supplements that have possibly a hormonal component like DHEA or progesterone or pregnenolone. I like to do some time off of those. Try not to recommend more than 5 new supplements at a time. I feel like people get overwhelmed. Some people are gun-ho about it and they'll do everything, and some people they won't, and then they'll do nothing, and then you're kind of square one. So prioritizing which supplements to take is important for people, and then assess their response to it. All those things I mentioned in the beginning in terms of assessing the response, make sure you're assessing them as they go through. Did you take this supplement? How'd you feel from it? When did you take it? Did you feel your symptoms were lessen? Did you feel they got worse? Always make sure you're assessing that information. Start low, go slow, especially in chronically ill people, especially people with like MCAS. They are reacting to everything. So usually I will have people go like the smallest dose possible and just like 1 supplement per day they add, and then how are they feeling? Give it a couple of days, and then slowly titrate up the dose to a more clinically relevant dose. Overload them because then they're going to have a horrible reaction. Then they're not going to like supplements. They're not going to like you, and it's not good for anyone. And then the big question, is this going to impact my liver? Just check it. For like $14, you could just purchase it or just go through their doctor, get yourself a CMP, and just check liver enzymes. Check your AST, or your ALT, GGT. What's funny enough, when I've seen these going up, they're on medications. That's usually when I see liver enzymes going up, not on supplements, but just reassure people that we can actually check to see if something is negatively impacting your liver or your kidneys, and it's by checking some of these enzymes. All right, supplements. That's just a primer. There is a lot more information we could talk about with that, but that's just some foundational dietary supplement information there. All right, let's talk about metabolic pathways and dietary supplements. And so one thing to know, as I mentioned in the previous webinar, vitamins and minerals will act as cofactors for specific reactions in the body. So for example, B1 is going to be used for decarboxylation reactions. B2 is going to be used for 1 electron redox reactions, B3, 2 electron redox reactions, B3 acyl carrier reactions, B6, if you don't remember anything else from this webinar, transamination reactions. This involves amino acids being interconverted with each other. That's why B6 is so important for protein metabolism. And decarboxylation reactions. Biotin used for carboxylation reactions, folic acid, B9, C1, or methyl group transfers, B12 radical and methyl transfer reactions, and then vitamin C is going to be used in the ascorbate glutathione cycle, as well as with peroxidase and oxidative enzymes. So that's just as a baseline different nutrients being used for certain enzymatic reactions specifically. Talking about metabolic pathways, two biggies are NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which is part of 1,000 different enzymatic reactions in metabolic pathways. It acts as a coenzyme, accepting electrons and hydrogen ions from other molecules during reactions. It can get reduced to NADH, and then the oxidized form of it is the NAD plus form. This is the thing that people have measured, that as we get older, we actually make less of this, and it's contributing to aging. Then there's FAD, flavin adenine dinucleotide. This is part of dozens of enzymatic reactions in metabolic pathways. This accepts electrons and hydrogen ions during oxidation reactions and becomes reduced to FADH2. Examples of this being used in reactions is a conversion of succinate to fumarate in the citric acid cycle. It's used in fatty acid oxidation, and it's also used in amino acid metabolism. So these are two big ones. Niacin, B3, is the precursor for NAD. And there's different forms of B3. There's nicotinic acid, there's nicotinamide, tryptophan. So 60 milligrams of tryptophan is needed to make 1 milligram of niacin, and B2 and B6 is needed for this process, so our body can form it. And then, of course, there's nicotinamide riboside, which is a popular supplement people take for boosting NAD production. Basically, if we're taking macronutrients and we're breaking them down into simple molecules, we will be using NAD to convert it to NADH. And if we are taking simple molecules and making macromolecules such as proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids, we're going to be using energy, and then we're going to be oxidizing NADPH to NADP. And so that's how that is used in those pathways. FAD, precursor for this is riboflavin. This is a magnesium-dependent interaction. So two themes of metabolic pathways is B vitamins and magnesium. Really, really huge for all metabolic pathways. B vitamins used everywhere. It's used in glycolysis. It's used in gluconeogenesis. It's used in fatty acid synthesis. It's used in the TCA cycle, especially in one-carbon metabolism. This is why I'm actually not a fan of individual amino acid supplementation. I usually am recommending a B complex because it's used everywhere, unless there's some overt vitamin deficiency that is observed. And I'll be talking about these individually later on. Okay, so let's start going down through some of these pathways. I'm covering a lot of different pathways, not all of them, but some major ones. So glycolysis and pyruvate metabolism. This is how we're turning glucose into, at least before it gets to the TCA cycle. So glucose to pyruvate. So glycolysis requires 2 NADs, and eventually we will form pyruvate, and then we're running that through pyruvate dehydrogenase in order to make acetyl-CoA to be used in the citric acid cycle. The big one, this pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, requires lots of different nutrients. So B1, B2, B3, B5, lipoic acid, and magnesium. And so here's the process here. You could see, let's see, lipoyl is the alpha-lipoic acid. There's the disulfide bridge. Alpha-lipoic acid has these sulfur groups where it can be used to facilitate this process. Pyruvate dehydrogenase is a multi-enzyme complex, E1, E2, E3. So there's multiple parts of it. The TPP is the B1. And so sometimes you'll see this as a block for people in converting blood sugar or glucose into fuel. And so this is the mechanism by how B vitamins can help lower blood glucose. Lipoic acid can help lower blood glucose. I usually recommend between 100 to 300 milligrams. And what has been shown in clinical studies for things like diabetic peripheral neuropathy, if you give them a high dose of lipoic acid, like 600 milligrams, it will help with peripheral neuropathy. Pretty good, actually. Magnesium also needed for this process. I generally recommend anywhere from 300 to 800. Magnesium can be taken to bowel tolerance. So if someone's taking magnesium, they're wondering if they could increase the dose, go for it. But if your stools get loose, then you got to back down a little bit. Magnesium, again, super important, used for so many different processes, bone formation. It's used for different receptors in the brain, the NMDA receptor, glutamate channels, calcium magnesium exchangers, magnesium ATP exchangers. It's used for DNA integrity, and it's used as a cofactor for just numerous different enzymes in the body. So it's super important. There's many different types of magnesium. So as a general rule, just very simplistically, magnesium citrate, generally for bowels and constipation. Magnesium glycinate or bisglycinate, that glycine has potentially GABAergic activities, so it's more relaxing. Magnesium taurate, that's taurine, it's cardiovascular support. Magnesium pittolate, which is pyroglutamic acid, can help increase glutathione. Magnesium oxide, it's less bioavailable, not that form of it because it's inorganic, but can help with the bowels as well. Magnesium threonate, the threonine is blood-brain barrier permeable, so it can help with brain support. Magnesium malate, malic acid, part of the mitochondrial cycle, so it can help with mitochondrial support. Ozonated magnesium. This is supposed to have some anti-parasitic effects. I tried it. I felt like it was decent. I felt like it helped my gut a little bit. I don't know if that means I had parasites or not, but anyway, I don't know. It is pretty expensive though, but no, it exists. Magnesium sulfate, of course, that's in Epsom salt, can help with aches and pains if you do a soak with that. And then magnesium orotate or orotic acid helps with DNA production. And there's probably other forms of magnesium. Magnesium aspartate, actually, I didn't include it here. So aspartic acid is a neurotransmitter. There is the TCA cycle. So we get pyruvate up here, we go to acetyl-CoA, and then we spin it through this citric acid cycle. Being practitioners, we've probably seen this a billion times. There are B vitamins being used at various parts of this cycle. Essentially, all B vitamins are used. There's B3, B5, B2, B7, B12. And so that's important there. Calcium, magnesium also used as part of the citric acid cycle. There are various blocks that can occur. So one thing to distinguish, if you do metabolite testing and you'll see some of these metabolites, they're decent, but then one of them is just drastically off. It's either very high or very low. There is a block there. It could be some environmental pollutant or toxin like a heavy metal or mycotoxin, or it could be a B vitamin deficiency. That's one thing to account for. So from here, you are basically making these NADHs, FADH2. We make 3 NADH and 1 FADH2. That goes into oxidative phosphorylation, which is this process where we're transporting electrons to this ATP synthase to make ATP, which is the energy currency in the body. And so in terms of supplements, one thing to consider is CoQ10 is used for this process. So this is where if someone is low in CoQ, you're going to get less of this flow here. CoQ10 can be beneficial for helping with lipid peroxidation and preserving oxidative phosphorylation. The dosing is typically, I've seen as low as 30. You could go 300 milligrams. I've seen some studies that use a gram. But so there's that. Typically, CoQ10 is the supplement that's recommended with statin therapy, just because statins have been shown to decrease CoQ10. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Other supplements that can help with oxidative phosphorylation. PQQ, which is also an antioxidant. It's found in some dietary components like spinach and dark leafy greens, but it helps keep CoQ10 reduced to prevent its oxidation. Carnitine, vitamin A, and alpha-lipoic acid. Gluconeogenesis. So this is the process of making glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. If you've never come across this, it's interesting, but so within that TCA cycle, our amino acids can be converted to individual TCA cycle metabolites. So for example, arginine, histidine, glutamine, and proline get converted to glutamate, which then gets converted to alpha-ketoglutarate. Not only leucine, lysine, tyrosine, tryptophan get converted into acetyl-CoA, which then gets converted to acetyl-CoA. So there's all these different on-ramps for amino acids to go into the TCA cycle. Very important. Transaminase. We are transporting amine groups between different compounds. We need B6. So B6 is very important for this process. Another thing too, to do gluconeogenesis means that we are not using glycogen as a fuel. So if we have sufficient zinc, we can promote glycogen synthesis and glucose uptake. So it's kind of blocks the process of gluconeogenesis because our body wants to use carbohydrates as a fuel first and foremost before we're starting to use amino acids as a fuel. Fatty acid oxidation. So this was one of the coolest things I learned because it's so intuitive. So basically we need carnitine. So, okay, fatty acid oxidation is when we're breaking down fatty acids to acetate to produce energy. We need carnitine in order to shuttle the amino acids into the mitochondria so that they can be burned as fuel. This is how carnitine, which has been shown to do many different things, helps with inflammation, it helps with fatigue, it helps with brain fog, also helps with weight loss because it's helping our body burn fat. So for carnitine, there's many different types. There's carnitine tartrate, there's carnitine fumarate. I like the fumarate because it's fumaric acid, so it can theoretically also help with mitochondrial function as well. That's dosed at 500 milligrams, 2 grams daily. Just be careful. Carnitine can inhibit the thyroid. So check someone's TSH. I have had people on carnitine supplementation. Their TSH goes high, they get off of it, it goes low. So this is where something like pulse dosing actually might be beneficial. And again, just to go back to this, carnitine is found in foods, it's found in meat products especially. So this is where someone's diet needs to be sufficient in getting it. But again, we're just talking about how you could supplement with some of these things. Betaine has been shown to increase fatty acid oxidation. We'll talk about that in the methylation cycle. It's typically dosed at 750 milligrams to 1 gram. And other things that have been shown to increase fatty acid oxidation: quercetin, omega-3s, capsaicin, resveratrol, basically flavonoids, EGCG, and curcumin. Ketogenesis, this is where we're using fats as fuel, so we're converting fat into ketone bodies. And then the process of making it is ketone oxidation, where we're converting ketones into carboxylic acids. And the process of this is generating this energy. There's a bit of a controversy here because some people, so on a ketogenic diet, you are getting less B vitamins. And so the question is, did you need the B vitamins just to break down carbs? And therefore, because you're using fats as a fuel, you don't need the vitamins and electrolytes as much. Well, some people debate that. But generally speaking, people feel better, in my experience, if they're on a ketogenic diet or they're in ketosis and they're supplementing with some of these things they're not getting, especially the electrolytes. There's the keto flu, where people are kind of low in some of these electrolytes. So electrolytes are big. Ts, medium chain like triglycerides. So these are fats that are easily absorbed. We don't have to micelize or emulsify them to absorb through our gastrointestinal tract, so we can just absorb them directly in our stomach. The C is referring to how many carbons, or the chain length. There's C8, C10, C12, also C6, but I prefer C8. It's just smaller than C10, C12, and I just find people respond better to it. Also, I find it silly when people take MCT oil and they're not going into ketosis. They'll have like a bunch of carbs and then they have MCTs. And it's like, I'm sorry, buddy, your body's going to use the glucose as a fuel rather than the MCTs, so it's kind of silly. So I actually don't recommend MCTs unless somebody is trying to go into this fat burning mode because they're avoiding carbohydrates. On a ketogenic diet, omega-3s, vitamin D, B complexes have been found to be beneficial. We could also supplement with exogenous ketones. There's the salt form, which is beta-hydroxybutyrate. You'll see that in supplements. And then there's the ester form of ketones, this 1,3-butanediol, which seems to be more beneficial with fewer side effects. So there's that. But in general, exogenous ketone supplementation can upset people's guts. The urea cycle is used for removing nitrogen from the body in the form of urea, which is then converted into, or ammonia is formed. And so two supplements that can help with this are arginine, which is here, and citrulline. These are needed for this process. Generally speaking, arginine, citrulline dose to roughly 3 to 6 grams daily. I didn't list it here, but I like arginine alpha-ketoglutarate. Seems to be a good form. Also, alpha-ketoglutarate itself it's potentially an anti-aging molecule, though can be potentially troublesome with people with like anxiety or PTSD issues. So you want to watch for this glutamate excess, which can be counteracted with B6. Contraindications with this: arginine can worsen asthma and can worsen viral infections, so just be careful with that. Nucleotide metabolism. So our nucleotides are purines and pyrimidines, will form the backbone of our adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. And so to make these, we use glucose and glutamine and carbon dioxide. So glutamine is important for this. Glutamine has been shown to have so many different benefits in terms of immune function, gut health. This can be dosed very high, 5 to 10 grams daily. Glycine, also part of this process, 3 to 5 grams daily. And then you'll see here, ribose is actually one of the starting sugar backbones for this process. Ribose is a little bit controversial itself. Some people say it alters blood sugar because it is a sugar type molecule. I feel like it maybe doesn't. Some people feel as though if you supplement with ribose, it prevents your body from using its own sugar resources for it. Ribose has been shown to be helpful, especially in heart conditions like heart failure. I personally like it. I personally notice a big difference, honestly, when I go on and off ribose. So I like to use it, especially around workouts. That is typically dosed 3 to 5 grams daily. And the magnesium, as you can see here, is used at various parts of this process as well. And folate is another thing. Actually, some anti-cancer medications will disrupt folate metabolism to stop this nucleotide creating process, which cancer cells just have it ramped up through the roof. Single carbon metabolism, if you attended my lecture a month ago at this point, I think it was, this is the methylation cycle. And so the methylation cycle, we are creating methyl groups, we're transferring them onto groups, or other chemical compounds. And so for this, basically all the vitamins are necessary for this pathway. Glycine can also be beneficial. Generally speaking, if someone's over-methylating, glycine is good because then it becomes methylated. If somebody is under-methylating, then trimethylglycine, which trimethyl means 3 methyl groups attached to the glycine, can also be beneficial. Trimethylglycine is betaine. So I said betaine earlier, trimethylglycine, same thing. SAMe is necessary for this pathway as well. It's actually been shown to have lots of different benefits, though I usually don't recommend SAMe because it's easy to put people kind of over the edge with methylation. And what SAMe breaks down into, there's especially the supplements, breaks down into these components that could be harsh on people's kidneys. So, and I have had people go on SAMe and they start having kidney pains and kidney issues. and then they go off of it, and then it goes away. And the question is the SAMe contributing to that? There is some studies with that. Choline and creatine require methyl donors to make, and if we supplement with them, we decrease the need of our methylation cycle, and we could kind of replete it a little bit. So I'm a big fan of choline and creatine supplementation to kind of help with this as well. Transulfuration. So we have the one carbon metabolism. It goes down into this part of the pathway where we have cystithione and cysteine. And then from this, we make taurine. We can also make glutathione. So this is a really big part of this. It's arguably more important than the methylation cycle, because these things, especially for a detox, it's very crucial. So some nutrients help with that. You'll see the serine coming in here. So serine, 2 to 4 grams daily, can help with this process. You see 10 to 30 milligrams is actually on the higher end. As I mentioned 2 webinars ago, B6, if you're too low or too high, that could be not good. It's one of the B vitamins, B6. You don't want to go overboard because it can be not good. Taurine, some people are low on that. Again, this is a metabolite that is measured or can be measured. That dosing for that is 1 to 3 grams daily. Glutathione, 100 milligrams to 1 gram daily. Space it out, though I recommend acetyl glutathione or liposomal glutathione. If you take glutathione and it's not one of these forms, your stomach and your gastric acid and your enzymes in your gut are going to just break it down into its individual amino acid components, and you're not going to get as much of the benefits as you would if it was intact. So to keep it intact, if you acetylate the glutathione, it's protected, or if you make it liposomals, where it's wrapped in a fat layer, you're also protecting it. So usually I recommend it in these forms. Glutamines need to make glutathione. You can supplement with that, and then cysteine as well. Need to make glutathione that typically does 600 milligrams to 1,500 milligrams. Detox. I know this is a lot, everyone, so hang in there. It's a lot for me as well, trust me. So for detoxification, there's 2 phases with this. There is phase 1, which is a cytochrome P450 enzymes. This takes toxins, and we're making them, which are typically more lipid soluble, we're making them more polar or more water soluble. And then we go to phase 2, which is a conjugation pathway, where we're sulfating them, we're glucuronidating them, glutathione, conjugating them. So we're basically adding things to them to help make them more water soluble so we can excrete them. So for phase 1, these P450 enzymes, they're doing oxidation, reduction, hydrolysis, hydration, dehalogenation. Nutrients that could help with this: riboflavin, niacin, B6, folic acid, glutathione, branched-chain amino acids, flavonoids, and phospholipids. Also, free radicals are formed during this process, so antioxidants can help protect us from this. Vitamin C, vitamin E, CoQ10, thiols found in garlic, onion, silymarin from milk thistle, pycnogenol, which is one of my favorite supplements. And then for phase 2, we want to support our ability to do these processes. So this is where glucuronic acid you could supplement with, typically around 500 milligrams, and calcium D-glucarate. Glutathione conjugation, just mentioned that previously. Methylation is important for this as well. So glycine, taurine, glutamine, and acetylcysteine. These are all things we could supplement with to help support our detoxification. Neurotransmitter synthesis. I think we have like 5 more slides, so just bear with me. So neurotransmitter synthesis, serotonin, going from tryptophan to 5-HTP. This enzyme requires these cofactors: NAD, B6, iron, folate, diopterin, vitamin D, going from 5-HTP. So this is why some people say, don't supplement with tryptophan. There's a whole part of this other pathway work to go into these more pro-inflammatory, excitotoxic metabolites like quinolinic acid. So don't supplement with tryptophan. Do 5-HTP because you bypass needing all this stuff. 5-HTP to serotonin, vitamin D, and B6. Serotonin, you could affect the receptors with sufficient EPA, DHA, or omega-3s, and then it convert serotonin to N-acetyl serotonin. I believe like B3 is a cofactor for that. And then N-acetyl serotonin to melatonin, folate, and SAMe are necessary for that process as well. Dopamine, we have phenylalanine as a precursor for dopamine. So first we have to get to tyrosine. Iron is needed at multiple parts of this process, actually. So this is where if somebody has, they're not getting enough iron in their diet, they could potentially have lower dopamine. Vitamin C, necessary for this process as well. And copper. This is kind of an interesting one. Iron and copper for dopamine. And there are metabolites, so homovalenic acid, vandyl-malonic acid, VMA. You could look at these, look at the ratio to these, and if you see that there is an imbalance, the first thing I'm thinking of is possibly iron deficiency, copper deficiency. There's also Clostridium metabolites that could inhibit this process as well. So then you have to consider the gut microbiome impacting this as well. And then B vitamins necessary for multiple phases of this process as well. GABA, this is an inhibitory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. One thing I like to make people aware, it's not just in our brain. We have GABA receptors in our enteric nervous system throughout our digestive tract as well. So some people say, well, if I just take GABA, is it kind of cross the blood-brain barrier? Well, it's affecting your enteric nervous system, which will send signals to your brain. So there's that effect as well. And what GABA breaks down into, which is one component, is succinate semialdehyde. This can cross the blood-brain barrier to an extent, better than GABA. So even its breakdown components can help with affecting GABA receptors in the brain. B6 needed for conversion of glutamate to GABA. So that's one of the first things I'll jump to is if somebody is having symptoms of glutamate excess, do they have sufficient B6, which is needed for this process? So that's another important thing. Herbs like valerian prevent the breakdown of GABA prevent the breakdown of succinate semialdehyde, that other GABA byproduct. Also, valerian has actions on the GABA receptor itself to an extent. If you look at studies, there's something called pharma-GABA, which when they've compared it to GABA, it just has a more profound effect. So if I'm recommending GABA, I'm usually recommending pharma-GABA. And then histamine is a big one. This is actually the biggest. This is actually my favorite one because I feel like everyone is impacted by histamine. There's so many things that will lead to just general histamine overload from many different things. Things from our diet, things from the air, our environment. Our body will use histamine as a signaling molecule in our immune system. It's also a neurotransmitter. This is why I actually don't like just straight up pharmaceutical histamine blockers, because we need histamine to be awake as well. So you don't want to block it too much. And some studies say, well, it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. It does to an extent. I know I can't take even like your loratadine. It makes me tired. So some natural mast cell stabilizers. So mast cells, when activated, will release histamine amongst many things, but ways to stabilize it. Vitamin C, our polyphenols or flavonoids here, quercetin, luteolin, apigenin, fisetin, theanine, parthenolide from feverfew, scopoletin from nettles, bicolin from Chinese skullcap, which is one of my favorite herbs. It has so many different uses. Preventing histamine degradation, diamine oxidase. So here's the histamine molecule. It can be broken down by this compound called diamine oxidase. This is something, some people have genetic deficiencies of this, so they don't break it down as much. Things like coffee, alcohol, farnesene will also deplete us of this. So some people just have generally lower levels. Histamine also can get it gets methylated to N-methylhistamine. And so to help start the process of getting rid of it, you need sufficient methyl donors. This is where methylation support, all those methyl donors I talked about previously, super important for this process. You can see histamine gets broken down to this intermediate, this acetaldehyde product. We need aldehyde dehydrogenase to further metabolize it. We can increase the expression of aldehyde dehydrogenase with sulforaphane and dihydromyricetin. I find this is more prevalent in Asian countries just because there is a stronger predisposition in the Asian community to have lower levels of this aldehyde dehydrogenase. Cofactors for this enzyme, zinc, B1, and B3. And then here's the monoamine oxidase B, which will also break down this N-methylhistamine. And for this, riboflavin is a cofactor. It's just, there's so much here for histamine. And to think the conventional approach is, let's just block the receptor. It's like, wait a minute, hold on. There's lots of things we could do here for histamine. And then I believe this is the last one. Okay. So cholesterol metabolism. Cholesterol is important. It's a component of our cell membranes, precursor for hormones and bioproduction. Cholesterol is made by every cell in the body. That's something that some people don't realize. If you look at studies, low cholesterol is also a risk factor for increased mortality and many other conditions. So you actually don't want to just suppress your cortisol all the way low. That's not good. You don't want to have it too high either, because that's also indicative of dysfunction as well. Cancer patients will have notoriously low cholesterol production because there's some dysfunction there. Our liver will also make cholesterol to be transported in the body, but our cells can make it as well. Now, one thing with this process is, at least pharmacologically, is to target the enzyme here, HMG-CoA reductase, to inhibit it from making, it's upstream from cholesterol, but this way it decreases our cholesterol production down here. Statins are not good. I mean, at least in my opinion, if you look at some studies, they're associated with mitochondrial disruption and damage, quite frankly. Some people, there's a risk variant, SCLO1B1. That gene has a couple of risk variants where people have impaired metabolism of statins, and they're more likely to have myositis or muscle pains from statin dosing. And I've had, in theory, if your cholesterol is a precursor for hormones as well, vitamin D, as well as our sex steroids, I've had my patients, especially older patients, who their hormones are already low, they go on a statin, and they're measurably, the hormones get lower. So we could target the HMG-CoA reductase enzyme with more gentle, natural inhibitors. So berberine, black cumin seed, citrus bergamot, some of my go-tos for that. Quercetin, resveratrol, salvinoic acid from Salvia militariza, and curcumin, also mild HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors. Notice I did not include red yeast rice because, especially in the United States, most red yeast rice supplements do not contain monocolin K, which is the compound in red yeast rice that blocks HMG-CoA reductase. So I've actually never recommended red yeast rice to any of my patients, and I have been able to get their cholesterol down. This is very important. Their diet has to be good too. I do not recommend these supplements without having done the dietary therapy and lifestyle therapy, because that's also affecting cholesterol. One thing to note here, if we inhibit this enzyme, we are blocking our production of CoQ10, ubiquinone, and then geranol, which is a precursor for the biosynthesis of vitamins E and K. So if somebody is on a statin, consider supplementing with CoQ10 and geranol for that process. All right, some takeaways from this. And so dietary supplements can be used to optimize metabolic pathways. Assessing metabolic pathways can provide information regarding the appropriateness of dietary supplements. First, ensure the diet and lifestyle are ideal, and that they're getting their nutritional needs met from there, and then consider supplementing. And then after introducing supplements for a period of time, reassess their symptoms, reassess their metabolic pathways to determine their response and make appropriate protocol alterations. So thank you for attending. If you would like to, so I work for Therium. We have a metabolomics test. If you're interested in looking at metabolic pathways in terms of health states, you can schedule a consult with me, and we're going to put that in the chat there, therio.me/train, and we could have a chit chat. Otherwise, thank you for attending, and I will take any questions at this time. Amy, if you are on, you can unmute the participants, and I'm going to put this in the chat. Thank you. Amy's already on. Thank you. All right. And it is 3, so if anyone has to go, feel free, but I will answer any questions. Or you could unmute yourself, or you could put it in the chat, either way. Is the keto diet recommended for most? Not really. Like, you could look at where the keto diet has been studied. So things like, especially neurological disorders, seizure disorder, possibly in cancer as well. It's tough. And I feel like, especially for women, it really hits people's hormones hard. And so, and the idea with the keto diet is you have to actually get into ketosis. That process is very difficult. I feel like there is more evidence on the benefits of the keto diet, but I feel like most people are shifting away from that. Like, even the carnivore people, I've noticed they're now, which being on a carnivore diet ketogenic diet is going to be much more heavily in fats than a carnivore diet, but you can go into ketosis by just avoiding carbs on like what was previously a more meat-heavy diet. But even carnivore people, I'm seeing they're recommending a lot more fruits, which are obviously going to take you out of ketosis. So yeah, I'm just, I find it rare that I'm recommending it unless it's for specific medical conditions that the keto diet has been shown to be beneficial. Otherwise, I'm just making people miserable. Some people want to do it, and it's like, all right, fine, we could help you with that. And you will see there are certain metabolites, certain fatty acid metabolites that you could measure. Well, you'll see on a ketogenic diet, you could see those ketones just being elevated. So we have a question here, very interesting. I'm taking many supplements, but I don't really know which ones my body needs, doesn't need. What kind of doctor should I find to help? Most of the doctors I go to don't know anything about supplements. So going to somebody that has been trained in this. Yeah, so first and foremost, testing is important. So going to a doctor that knows how to even interpret a test too. People that have been trained in nutrition are a good start. Although I feel like even your traditional nutritionist, like a registered dietitian, isn't really that familiar. A certified nutrition specialist, CNS, I find their level of understanding is a bit higher. People that have done functional medicine training, naturopathic medicine training. I mean, there's lots of different training organizations out there that are helping people understand what supplements. But yes, unfortunately, within the conventional medicine field, usually I find one of two things. When somebody goes on supplements and they've done diet and lifestyle, when they go to their doctor and they're like, yeah, I'm taking these supplements, but their doctor sees their blood pressure is better, their weight has improved, their mood has improved, all their symptoms have improved, the doctor just goes, keep doing what you're doing. It's like they don't really care that they're on supplements. And then if somebody is, even if they're stable or they're getting worse, if somebody's on a supplement, the doctor will put them on. I'll tell you a story. I had somebody who they had high blood pressure. They started going on dietary supplements and their blood sugar just started going through the roof. And their doctor was like, "Oh, I think it's these supplements that you're on. You should probably just get off of them." And I asked my patient, I'm like, "Were you put on any medications during this time?" And he was like, "Well, my doctor put me on a thiazide diuretic to help lower my blood pressure." So I looked it up, and thiazide diuretics are associated with increased blood sugar. So I'm like, I don't know if it's the supplements. I think it's the medication. So I went back to his doctor, told him this. He got off thiazide diuretic, and then his blood sugar went down. Oftentimes I find supplements are a scapegoat for actual medication issues as well. Not that I'm advocating people to go off their medications, but I'm just saying it's complex, and if a doctor's not trained in supplements, they just whatever they don't know, it's the bad thing. So they just demonize it. So yes, and then looking at metabolic pathways, I mean, that's the point. All these metabolic pathways, if you do not have the vitamins and cofactors or other nutrients for these pathways to function, you're going to see blocks in the pathway functioning. And so you can assess for the symptoms that are associated with these nutrient deficiencies that I covered in the previous week. You could assess and then assess the labs, where it's either testing the nutrients directly or looking at the pathways that would be disrupted from having abnormal levels of or insufficient levels of cofactors. Yes, I do recommend specific brands. So practitioner level brands. Okay, this isn't a CME, so I guess I could say it. So I like Vital Nutrients. I like Pure Encapsulations, Douglas Labs. I know some of these companies have been bought by, I think, Nestle or some companies that people generally don't like, but that's kind of hit or miss. New Chapters one, I find that a lot of people don't talk about. They have their own sourcing. They have like fields in, I think, Costa Rica or something where they grow and source their own herbs, and they have certain extraction processes. So I would say if there's one that people don't know about that I like a lot, I would say New Chapter is a big one. Yeah, Body Bio. It's actually from near me. I like they have some good gut supplements as well. Designs for Health, another good one. So where do you get the test you need for diagnosis? It depends on what you mean by diagnosis. So, so for metabolomics, looking at metabolic pathways, it's not approved for diagnosing anything, right? Like you can't diagnose somebody with TCA cycle dysfunction. TCA cycle dysfunction will lead to depression and diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And so yes, there's ways to diagnose those, but looking at the pathways that affect more things, that's where you could looking at the metabolic pathways. And again, I would leave it up to your doctor as well to order the appropriate tests if you're trying to be diagnosed. I mean, that was one thing I covered before. Like, for example, anemia, you could have macrocytic anemia where it's typically associated with deficiency in B12 and folate. And so, you could look at that as well. Do you have an opinion on amniotic stem cell IV? Well, it seems like it's beneficial. I myself have not worked directly with stem cells. I have many colleagues that have, and they're big fans of it. I have heard of something called V cells, very small embryonic-like stem cells. Those seem to be very promising. They don't have to be derived from embryonic tissue. They could be derived directly from our own body as well. And we could kind of wake them up and then implant them in people. And I've heard some profound results. So that's probably the biggest one that I have come across. All right. Any other questions, people? So we do have other webinars. We did 2 webinars for nutrition the last 2 weeks, and then we had one on methylation. And so please, and this will be shared to YouTube. You'll be able to review this webinar. And yeah. All right. Yes, the slides will be posted. Yep. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for attending, and I will most likely see you next week. So everyone, take care. Amy, thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.